You know, there's not a lot of things in the gun world that people agree on, but one thing that all of us revolver lovers can agree on is that Ruger revolvers are stronger than Smith & Wesson revolvers. They're bigger, they're beefier, and they're made that way to be stronger, right? Wrong. Ruger revolvers are not stronger than Smith & Wesson revolvers. They're just bigger and beefier. And the reason they're bigger and beefier is because they are made from cast metal, not forged metal. When you make something from cast metal, it has to be thicker and bigger to be as strong as the forged metal like Smith & Wesson uses. If the Rugers were going to be stronger than the Smith & Wesson, they'd even have to be bigger and beefier, and no one would want to carry them, so it wouldn't work out for them. If you do the math and you sit down, you figure out this is how much energy each gun needs to be able to withstand, well, the forged gun isn't going to have to be as thick. The cast gun is going to have to be thicker and beefier to be able to withstand the same amount of energy. And both companies do their math based on basically the same amount of energy. Neither one of them overdoes it or underdoes it. So in the end, the Rugers are a little bit bigger so that they can be just as strong, but not stronger. So if we accept the fact that Rugers aren't stronger, you have to say to yourself, well, why does everyone think they're stronger? Well, the main reason most people think they're stronger is most people are morons and they don't bother to look anything up. That's why most people think Rugers are stronger, but there's really two reasons why a lot of people think Rugers are stronger than Smith & Wesson. One is the actual design of the gun. The Ruger doesn't use a side plate. It uses more of a one-piece design. It also uses two locking points for its cylinder. The Smith & Wesson does have a side plate and only uses one locking point for its cylinder. But this doesn't make it weaker. Because it's a forged gun, that's all it needs. Because the Ruger is a cast gun and therefore not as strong, it can't use a side plate and it needs two locking points for its cylinder. It doesn't make it stronger, it's just required because it's a cast gun. It needs those things to be as strong as the forged gun. The forged gun does not need those extra measures to be able to handle the pressures it needs to be able to withstand. Now, the second reason people think that Rugers are stronger is because there are Ruger-only loads out there on the market. These are hotter, more powerful versions of rounds, and they're Ruger-only. So people think, well, if the Ruger is the only one that can handle these hotter, more powerful loads, the Ruger must be stronger. But that's not true. The only real legitimate case where there are Ruger-only loads is pretty much the 45 Colt. And that's because nowadays people are loading really hot 45 Colt loads. When 45 Colt came out originally, and in its more traditional loading, it's more like a 45 ACP. But some people, after the 45 Colt started being more popular in rifles, started loading it to where it was almost as powerful as a 44 Magnum. So you had this whole market for these hotter, more powerful 45 Colt loads. Well, Ruger sold a lot of single-action revolvers, which are traditionally 45 Colt, so they had good reason to build their guns stronger so that they could handle the new, modern, really heavy-duty 45 Colt loads. Smith & Wesson sells double-action, single-action revolvers, which aren't popular in 45 Colt, so they had no reason to upgrade to the stronger guns for the more modern 45 Colt loads. Ruger was basically just making a gun even bigger and even beefier so that it could handle the modern 45 Colt loads because they were very popular with Ruger lovers, people that liked the single-action revolver, especially for farmers, ranchers, etc. People like that wanted a good single-action gun that could handle the hot 45 Colt loads. And the Rugers that can handle those loads have to be even bigger and beefier than regular Rugers. They're actually kind of unwieldy, which is why we now have the new Vaquero, which can't handle those loads. To handle those loads on the old Vaqueros, the cylinder walls had to be thicker, therefore the frame had to be thicker, so you ended up with a very thick gun. It may have looked like the old, Colt single-action guns, but it wasn't very much like them. It was much bigger, bulkier, and heavier. Whereas the Smith & Wesson 45 Colt revolvers had the more traditional thinner walls on their cylinders, and they never had any reason to make cylinders with bigger, thicker walls. But today, that's actually, like I said, kind of reversed. The newer Vaqueros can't handle the hot loads. The 45 Colt became very popular with single-action shooters, cowboy shooters who want to shoot lighter loads, cowboy loads, and they didn't want the big, beefy, super heavy gun that could handle the 44 Magnum level loads of 45 Colt. They wanted something more traditional sized, so the new Vaqueros don't handle the hot 45 loads. They're smaller and thinner. Now, the only other caliber that does come in a Ruger-only load is a .44 Magnum, but that doesn't have anything to do with strength of the cylinder or strength of the gun. That has to do with length of the cylinder. Rugers have a slightly longer cylinder, and some rounds take advantage of that. The Smith & Wesson has a shorter cylinder. So in the end, you can see, if you just do a little research, which I do recommend, because not only do you get to learn something new, you get to not sound like an idiot when you repeat stuff you don't understand. If you do a little research, you can see that generally speaking, Rugers are not stronger than Smith & Wesson. They're only stronger in that one very specific circumstance where they're built to be even bigger, bulkier, heavier than Smith & Wesson, and Smith & Wesson just doesn't bother to do that, whereas Ruger was bothering to do that for a while. And like I said, even that's turning around now, because if Ruger builds the guns to handle those hotter loads, they're so big and heavy that now nobody's wanting them. If Smith & Wesson built a .45 Colt single action, it wouldn't have to be as thick because it's forged. But because the Rugers are cast, they have to be oversized, and people really aren't wanting those now. So now we have the new Vaqueros, which are smaller, but only handle the .45 Colt traditional loads, just like Smith & Wesson will. And still, the Smith & Wesson is still thinner, lighter, smaller than the Ruger. The Ruger still has to be bigger because it's cast. Now, Ruger doesn't just make the single actions like the Vaqueros and the Blackhawks in the .45 Colt caliber. They also make a double action single action gun, the Red Hawk, in .45 Colt. Now, the Red Hawk is built to .44 Magnum specifications, so I don't know why you wouldn't just get a .44 Magnum, but if you want to be able to shoot the really hot .45 Colt loads in a double-action, single-action revolver, the Red Hawk would be the gun for you. Smith & Wesson does not bother to build a .45 Colt revolver built to the .44 Magnum specifications, so if you wanted to have their gun, which basically the 25 is the only one I really know of, you'd have to shoot loads that are not Ruger only. In that case, you're definitely going to want the Ruger. And if you're going to shoot the Ruger-only loads in a single action, you're still going to want the Ruger. But that's really the only case. So stop believing everything you hear from some grizzled old guy in a gun shop who probably isn't even really sure the world is round yet. He hasn't been convinced of that. And stop listening to people on the internet that think Alex Jones is actually a good news source. Start doing a little research for yourself and find out the truth. I think that often you'll find, as in this case, the things that you hear just aren't true. This is just a bunch of misinformed people who don't understand what they're talking about, yet still feel the need to spread their ignorance to the masses.